It's my pleasure to hand over to Dr. Fraietta from the University of Pennsylvania, who will cover CAR T-cell therapy for CLL.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Wiesner. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about what is arguably the epitome of personalized medicine for CLL, and that's CAR T-cell therapy, as you may have guessed. So why are CAR T-cells referred to as living drugs engineered to fight CLL and other cancers? Our immune cells are typically very good at recognizing altered or foreign cells and dispatching them. But in the case of many cancers, including CLL, they often seem to turn a blind eye to the cancer. So how do we solve this? As you may have guessed, CAR T-cell therapy could be a potential solution. So what is it? Well, it's a form of immunotherapy that uses specially altered T cells. And of course, T cells are part of the immune system that, whose one of many functions is to fight cancer. And so I'll elaborate on how the treatment is done, but basically a sample of the patient's T cells are collected from the blood, then modified to produce special structures. And we call these CARs, which stands for Chimeric Antigen Receptors. And the T cells then begin to express these on their surface. So they're engineered. And when these CAR T cells are reinfused into the patient, the new receptors enable them to recognize the leukemia cells and to kill them. So CAR T cells are living drugs because essentially they can go anywhere, they can do almost anything, and most importantly, these engineered cells can be programmed to make decisions. And you don't get that with chemotherapy or targeted drugs that you heard about. So what are the key phases of CAR T-cell therapy for CLL? And I realize that this diagram may look more complicated than it is, but basically we could just think about a few key steps to sort of distill this. There's the collection phase, whereby a patient's own T cells are isolated in a process that we call leukapheresis, and then these cells are frozen. Then we have what we call a programming or a reprogramming phase. So after thawing the cells, viral DNA that provides the program to make the CAR is incorporated into the T cells at the manufacturing facility. And that's what essentially transforms them into CAR T cells. And then finally, we have infusion. Patients are treated with a short course of preparatory chemotherapy and then reinfused with their modified T cells. So you may wonder, what are the responses to CAR T-cell therapy in CLL? What have we seen in clinical trials? And importantly, what are the side effects of treatment? So to tackle the first question, early results of CAR T-cell therapy for treating leukemia and lymphoma were highly promising and exciting. And so many patients whose, if we think about CLL, whose CLL returned or in whom other standard treatments failed, achieved complete responses, meaning no signs of cancer with CAR T-cell therapy. And that's pretty remarkable. Notably, I just wanted to mention today to all of you, the first two patients who we treated at the University of Pennsylvania just had their anniversary and remain in remission more than 10 years after CD19 CAR T-cell therapy. And these two individuals have no detectable evidence of CLL by any measure. Okay, so what are the potential side effects that we see? Well, the most common is something called cytokine release syndrome, which is similar to flu-like symptoms, really. Neurological events can also be experienced and can be serious in some patients. And other people who are treated sometimes have low white blood cell or red cell counts. But fortunately, most of these side effects can be managed with drugs, or they could be resolved on their own without the need for treatment. All right, so what is the current status of FDA-approved CAR T-cell therapy for CLL? We don't yet have approval for CLL, but the good news is that there are approximately 30 clinical studies across the globe currently recruiting CLL patients for CAR trials. And we anticipate that approvals are really on the horizon. But to confirm the early successes of this therapy in CLL that I mentioned earlier, really we need longer term trials that enroll larger numbers of patients. And the larger trials will also help us to further identify the side effects of this therapy and of course better ways and perhaps the best ways to manage them. So how does, many patients often ask us, how does CAR T-cell therapy compare with other standard treatments for CLL? And this is sort of a difficult question to answer. But the major advantage is the CAR T-cell therapy is a single infusion that usually requires at the most 2 weeks of inpatient care, and then it's done. And so that's clearly different than other therapies. Also, when CAR T cells are effective, they can induce deep clinical remission, and there are not many treatments for CLL, at least highly relapsed refractory CLL, that can induce deep, sustained, complete remissions. So that's what sort of makes them different and separates them from other therapies. So finally, and what I wanted to leave you with, of course, is, what's on the horizon? So what's on the horizon? And I want to mention there are many things on the horizon, in fact, but just I wanted to focus on 3 major things. So firstly, we and others are studying CAR T cells in combination with targeted drugs, and particularly ibrutinib, which you've heard a lot about today. And this approach appears to actually enhance the CAR T cells' effect in clinical trials of CLL. And other studies are evaluating whether other immunomodulatory, agents such as checkpoint inhibitors can increase activation of CAR T cells. We're trying to develop remote control CARs of sorts. So researchers are really working to develop CARs that could be suicide signals that allow them to be killed if needed. But the more exciting research, at least in my mind, is developing these clever engineering systems to try to regulate CARs, so to turn them on, to turn them off, to turn them up and down at will biologically. And so that knowledge should also improve the safety of this approach. And then finally, we're engaged in designing biomarker-driven CAR T-cell therapy for CLL. And so the premise of this is that we have strong initial evidence that CLL patients with specific populations of T cells that can sort of be considered biomarkers are more likely to respond to CAR T-cell therapy. And these cells can be easily identified in a preliminary blood test. And so the ability to select patients most likely to benefit using biomarkers would really have a tremendous clinical impact, as this therapy could then be applied only to patients most likely to experience complete remission, patients unlikely to respond to pursue other options. So it's a very exciting time in personalized CAR T-cell therapy for CLL. And with that, I'd like to thank you.